I don't make the best financial decisions. Over the course of the last 15 some odd years collecting retro games and taking it rather seriously, I've walked a fine line between fiscal responsibility and barely making ends meet, and I attribute a lot of that to my irrationality when it comes to buying up used video games. To put my hysteria into perspective, I offer similar sentiments from Hitbox co-founder Sean Huffer.
I got like a few bucks, and it was like food or Dreamcast. He was like, okay, we'll go with Dreamcast games, you know?
That's the right choice, it's fine. However, after amassing a sizable library, I decided in late 2019 that my collection was pretty much complete. I bought most of what I set out to find, hoarding roughly 90% of the games on my bucket list, along with some extras that just made sense. I was finally ready to settle down and indulge in what I accomplished, if you know what I mean. Back in mid-December, I started working on a project where I chronicle my experiences playing my entire GameCube collection, plus extras within a 30-day window. The concept is based on a video that a little channel known as Forge Labs did in early 2019, where Sean played nothing but Game Boy for 30 days straight, and I thought, I can do that. I'm on day 52, if that tells you how it's going. My journey eventually brought me to this, Cubivore, Survival of the Fittest, most infamously known today for its egregious price tag and rarity. I bought it in an eBay auction without the manual right around the time that I began pulling back from the retro collecting scene altogether. And once I got it, I did what I always did. I mindlessly shelved it and gave myself the empty promise that I'll actually play it one day. Now, I own a few of these holy grails or games that come close to that status. And while taste is subjective, my experience has shown me that a steep price tag will rarely equate to an equal level of satisfaction. The allure of owning something rare can be reduced to nothing more than a talking point or a weird flex amongst collectors, though some of them are pretty cool. But most of these otherwise unremarkable games see the perfect storm of circumstances that lead to their coveted status. And that's something I want to explore today with Cubivore. Get down into the weeds of its history, learn what brought it to life and why is it so elusive in the wild. So stick around as we dissect the ins and outs of what is arguably the most valuable and rarest game on the Nintendo GameCube. This is Holy Grails, Cubivore Edition. Cubivore has a weird legacy. Development started sometime around 1998 under the name Dobutsu Bancho, or Animal Leader, for the Nintendo 64 disc drive by Saru Brune, a collaborative effort between Gabe and Ito, story writer for Parappa the Rapper, and Jungle Park creative force Gento Matsumoto. Saru Brune was an extremely small development studio, which Matsumoto founded back in 1990 after serving as Shigeru Miyamoto's right-hand man at Nintendo for nearly 15 years, though details on what he actually did under Miyamoto are hard to come by. For most of the company's lifespan, Saru Brune rarely had more than a handful of dedicated employees, and projects for that matter. Starting out as little more than a duo, Saru Brune provided graphical support for 1994's Melon Brains. They briefly ballooned up to 12 members when the studio launched 1996's Jungle Park, though that growth would be short-lived as the entire team left following the game's launch. Gento Matsumoto himself is a fairly interesting character to investigate. While working on Melon Brains, he also assisted Satoshi Tajiri with Game Freak's 1994 platformer Pulse Man for the Sega Mega Drive, as well as contributed to his book Shin Game Design. He served a 6-month stint in prison from late 1994 to 95 following a string of vehicular infractions, ranging from speeding to driving without a license, and claims that he walked away from that experience a changed man, almost recommending that a short spell in prison could be used as a mind-focusing exercise. Saru Brune was eventually picked up by Marigold Management in '96, a joint corporation owned by Nintendo and human resources company Recruit. Marigold's main focus was to specifically seek out third-party support for the Nintendo 64 and bankroll those studios. You might recognize some of their developers, like Umbrella, who developed Hey You Pikachu, Noise of Custom Robo fame, Param, creators of Doshin the Giant, and Clever Trick, a team working on the Echo Delta prototype specifically made for the Nintendo 64 disc drive. This was more or less a reactive play by Nintendo, as Sony had been scooping up a lot of the talent that previously worked with Nintendo in the past, and as a result, saw the PlayStation eclipse the 64 sales by nearly 3-1. Being such a small team, Sarah Brunet was in no position to develop a fully fledged game, which is 5 people. To support their investments, Marigold and Nintendo brought in a team of developers from Intelligent Systems, best known for their work on the Paper Mario series, though many of the designers also have credits to Mario Kart Super Circuit and Advance Wars for the Game Boy Advance. As development was underway, a team of IGN journalists attended Nintendo's annual Games Expo, Space World 2000, where they first encountered an early build of Animal Leader. It was marketed as this Darwinist-style action-adventure, hunting and being hunted while you clawed your way up the food chain. In fact, IGN still has an excerpt from the English press sheet for the game on their website. When animals were still human, the world was filled with the untamed. Wilderness dwelled in everything, and life sprung up everywhere. However, animals spent their days in tedium, and the wild was gradually forgotten. The wild started to crumble and become scattered about. In this animalistic action game, Dobutsu Bancho, survival of the fittest is the law of the land. By using wild, untamed instincts to fight and feed off of other animals, you must crawl your way to the top of the animal kingdom and bring the wild back to civilization. Animal Leader left the Western staff in a fit of disbelief and confusion. It defies all classification, they decried in their 2001 article covering the event, describing animals categorized by the number of rectangular polygons attached to their body, slithering or walking lopsided as you attempt to maul unsuspecting prey and devour their meat in hopes of evolving into a higher being. It's probably the weirdest game to come out on the N64. What is it about? Well, no one really knows. Not even the programmers are exactly sure what genre Dobutsu falls under. But the words evolution, life, and love are key factors. It's weird. Plans for its launch on the Nintendo 64 disk drive ultimately fell through due to the platform's low sales, and the game would be converted to the N64 cartridge sometime in late 2000, early 2001. The transition was short-lived, as it would again be converted to Nintendo's next-generation console, the Nintendo GameCube, along with other recognizable titles like Star Fox Adventures, Eternal Darkness, and Animal Crossing. In early 2002, Matsumoto attended a special event in Shibuya as a keynote speaker with Param lead Kazutoshi Ieda and Capcom producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi, where they discussed the troubles involved with developing for the Nintendo 64 disk drive, as well as the transition from 64 to GameCube. Much of the conversation revolved around the philosophies of being a game creator. However, Matsumoto actually let slip that Animal Leader was originally considered for the Sony PlayStation. If it wasn't for the long load times the console was criticized for. Nintendo was gearing up for the game's regional street date of February 21, 2002. However, in the months leading up to the Japanese launch, Western news outlets were curious if the Evolution simulator would ever see Western shores. In an interview following a month after the Shibuya event, Shigeru Miyamoto and the late Satoru Iwata attended a Las Vegas roundtable to discuss the GameCube's release schedule for games like Animal Crossing, Pokemon, Zelda, and ultimately Animal Leader. Miyamoto revealed that Nintendo was not fully confident that Animal Leader was the right fit for Western audiences, and that they needed additional research before localization could begin. Unfortunately, Nintendo just wasn't willing to put up the funds for a potential flop on their brand new console, especially following the thrashing they received by Sony towards the tail end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle. That said, Animal Leader would ultimately see a US release by way of Atlas USA, announcing in August that same year that they'd commit to a stateside release on November 5, 2002, under the name Cubivore, Survival of the Fittest. Cubivore opens up with this wandering narrative describing the world as a once lush and vibrant wilderness. That is until the invasive colorless beasts arrive with their leader, the killer Cubivore, devouring the flourishing wild and its inhabitants until the environment is nothing more than a barren cave with small patches of life sprinkled here and there. Left unchecked, the colorless beasts consume the wilds, which results in them gaining unparalleled power by way of the raw meat, evolutionary traits that grant them the ability to block, dash, swallow more meat, and more. Your goal in Cubivore is to become the wilderness's apex predator, the king of the Cubivores, return the wild to its former glory, take out the killer Cubivore, and mate with the ultimate female. You begin as a small single-squared organism that must crawl on its belly and eat the snack grass and bugs around him to build up energy. As you begin taking on larger predators and eating more advanced creatures, your beast's body composition and color will mutate to take on new forms, all depending on what creatures you decide to eat. The types of beasts range across 5 different colors and intensity. The color denotes the species, like the bird-like retipeds and the canine-based Grayodons, where the intensity dictates the power level of a creature, pale being the weakest and rage being the strongest. The number of limbs a creature has also regulates how much raw meat it can hold, as well as what kind of beasts it can eat. For example, a single-limbed creature can only have one type of raw meat, and can kill a two-limbed creature, but no more than that. Meanwhile, a three-limbed beast can have 3 different types of raw meat and kill up to 4-limbed creatures. Now, a beast could recover its limbs that have been torn off, but they can't grow new ones. That's where mating comes in. You'll eventually find these heart-shaped caves where your little monster can link up with a bunch of other little monsters and make little monster babies that emerge from the father's dead corpse. Starting off, you may only attract 1 or 2 females, but as you collect more mutations, more females will be attracted to you. Upon killing the area boss and collecting the raw life upgrade, the run essentially ends, allowing you to mate with the ultimate female. The scenario wraps up with this giant Cubivore showing up, flirting with you and talking about just how manly you are, and then snuffed out of existence. If you haven't mutated into all 150 forms, you'll be forced to begin a new lap, and the cycle continues until you've collected all 150 mutations. This is fairly difficult to accomplish, especially on your first playthrough, but once you unlock the 3 base Cubivore forms, you'll always have an option to choose where in the lap that you want to start to find the mutations that you're missing. Cubivore's appeal lies in the unknown. It's a fairly straightforward game that wears its flaws on its sleeve. Controls are a bit clunky, especially with some of the slower mutations, and by the time you reach your 3rd run, the difficulty ramps up considerably. So if you didn't properly strategize your easy mutations, you might have a rough time starting out. And there could also be a lot said about the minimalistic art direction of both the graphics and the OST, which you'd either find charming or revolting. That said, I had a lot of fun romping around the wilderness, with plenty of enemies to pick apart, training grounds to boost stats, and being on the hunt for that single mutation you may be missing. I also have to give it to the localization team, as they did an outstanding job giving Cubivore's dialogue this goofy, quirky personality. Though it dances on cringe levels of puns, it never takes itself seriously and keeps the tone really lighthearted, even when faced against the most indomitable of Cubivores. I'm not going to pretend that making your way through all of the laps without some sort of payoff isn't demoralizing, and you might start to feel some fatigue from its one-dimensional formula. This game isn't made to be a race. It feels more like a play-at-your-own-pace type of game, chipping away at the different mutations until you finally get your shot at taking out the killer Cubivore and placing yourself on the throne of Shangri-La. Like that cold, fateful day in December of 2000, IGN and other media outlets were left flabbergasted. It was, without a doubt, like nothing else currently on the market. Critics praised Cubivore for its customization, offering the 150 different mutations to go out and find. Plus, the system mechanics were structured with a lot of depth, like being able to shed unwanted colors, change mutations on the fly, and even conditioning the player to strategize in what order you collect your mutations to set yourself up for stronger easy mutation milestones. For a game that was so stripped down and seemingly bare bones, there was a lot to unpack. On the flip side, frustrations with the camera added an additional layer of difficulty in battle. Being developed with the Nintendo 64 in mind meant that controlling the camera with the C stick operated in a similar manner as pressing one of the C buttons on the N64 controller. There weren't any dynamic or free camera options that evolved past the annoying Super Mario 64 model. Graphics and textures were slammed for being the worst on the platform, with sound quality to match, which again are unfairly attributed to the transition Sarah Brunet faced when they were converting the game to the N64. Ultimately, Cubivore Survival of the Fittest faced some rather middling criticisms, but it wasn't a bad game. Sure, it appeals to a more experimental audience, but it walked away with a 71 Metacritic score and an 8.1 user score. So what happened? Why did this game go completely unnoticed, end up on the endangered list, and then years later command an asking price next to that of a PlayStation 5? Well, you can kind of blame it on the one who published it. The thing with Atlus, especially during the mid-90s to the late 2000s, is that they were a pretty small company before Sega's acquisition in 2013. In an archived interview, MTV's Patrick Klepek sat down with Atlus's PR lead Aram Jabari back in 2008 to discuss the supply and demand problems that was plaguing the company during that time. The issue is, being a small publisher that exclusively released niche Japanese titles forced Atlus to be very conservative with its production. To quote, "There is no malice in it. I wish that we can produce to demand. But it's a lot better to come up 5% short in sales as opposed to have 25% excess product. Because with that 25%, you're going to have markdowns." This was a conversation that followed shortly after Atlus published Vanillaware's 2007 action role-playing game Odin Sphere. which originally printed to the company's typical quota. But once reviews rolled in and word got out about its uncanny quality, demand for the game skyrocketed, making it one of the most coveted games of the PlayStation 2 era for years until its re-release in 2016. The case study on Cubivore and games like it would later become one of the many talking points to justify developers and publishers to put their game on online platforms like Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, and whatever Nintendo tries to do at the time. And even as far back as 2008, many consumers were open to the idea of an online marketplace being available to purchase their games. However, this was also at the height of when pre-orders for video games were really being pushed hard, and some consumers and business owners pushed back on the notion of digital distribution, lest the value of their precious Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne would diminish from $100 to $17.25. The commercial failure of Cubivore sent shockwaves through most of the parties involved with its creation. Marigold Management would liquidate just 6 months after the game's launch, shutting down Sour Brune for good. Nintendo carried its legacy on by briefly mentioning it in Super Smash Bros. Melee, but nothing more beyond that. Both Gaben Ito and Gento Matsumoto would leave the games industry for good following the studio's dissolution, with Ito taking on a series of side projects like television and music production, all while teaching as a professor at Joboshi University. Matsumoto, on the other hand, would go on to found Books in the late 2000s, a web service that allows writers to create, publish, and sell both paper and ebooks at no cost. Since Survival of the Fittest, there hasn't been an attempt to make a sequel, nor has there been anything remotely like it, besides Spore maybe. So who is this game for? Cubivore is certainly not going to appeal to the common man, and most people can probably get by with just playing it for 20 minutes just to say that they played a rare game. In fact, I think that if the opportunity presented itself to you, maybe if you stumbled upon a gaming PC that can run an application similar to the GameCube, you should give it a shot at the very least. All in the name of video game preservation, of course. Buying it, however, is a different story, and should probably be reserved for the hardcore retro collectors. Cause I ain't ever heard someone say that Cubivore was their favorite game. Cubivore, for me, is a mildly spiritual experience, and I honestly had a lot of fun with it. Aside from its repetitive gameplay, I did find the appeal of its stripped-down design, telling the story of its own evolution and the subsequent mutations it experienced along the way. Hey everyone, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please click that like button and drop a comment to share your thoughts. And if you'd like to see more long-form content, don't hesitate to subscribe. I'm currently aiming to get back to a monthly schedule for major releases while also providing 1 to 2 YouTube short series per week. I'm coming up on an extended sabbatical that should assist me with those goals, so please stay tuned to the channel for future updates. Until next time, take care.